Welcome to the AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Today, my guest is Robbie Harriman from OCD Tech. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here.
Well, thank you for coming. Where'd you come in from today?
Coming in from Boston.
Awesome. So you left the cold to come to the cold.
About a degree of difference, but I'll take it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming. I'd like to get started with a little bit about you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the career path that brought you to where you are today?
Sure. So I actually started in IT. My first job out of high school was dial-up internet support. So I'm maybe a bit older than I look, hopefully. But started there, and then from that job moved into IT administration and PC repair, and then eventually made my way into IT systems administration in the casino industry, and eventually making my way into security and compliance about 7 years ago with OCD Tech, and have been there since.
Cool. Boy, that had to be really interesting doing dial-up tech support. I did CRM installs at dealerships when people were getting computers for the first time, and I actually had a person take the mouse and touch the screen with the mouse. I mean, you probably had calls like that all the time.
There was a lot of that, yeah. And I came from rural Maine, is where I was born and raised. So in Maine, dial-up was a thing up until fairly recently. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about cyber threats. What are the cyber threats that are facing dealerships today?
So a recent study, every year Verizon releases a data breach incident report, which aggregates a bunch of information of known breaches and attacks that we see across all industries. One of the staggering statistics was that about 74% of attacks involved the human element. So
Wow.
Ultimately, it's not necessarily technology that's always being exploited, it's people tend to be the weakest link for attackers.
That's interesting. I mean, we do a lot of training here on what to look for, and I imagine every company probably does these or needs to these days.
Certainly.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because I want to talk about kind of the who, what, where, why. I've got a bunch of quick questions for you.
Sure.
Let's start with who is doing this.
So by and large, most of what we're seeing is organized cybercrime. So it's important when we think about attackers not to think about an individual trying to hack into an auto dealership, but a group of organized criminals reminiscent of the gangs of yesteryear, the mob and mafia. They're getting organized, they're collaborating online, they have business structures, they have org charts, they have profit sharing, employee events and incentives, and it's really a business and an operating machine that are trying to hack into businesses today. So that's one of the most common attackers. Nation states are another threat, and no business is too small and no industry is exempt from that. One thing that we're seeing is attacks from countries like North Korea, where they're actually attacking smaller US-based businesses in order to fundraise to launch much larger scale attacks against critical infrastructure and larger organizations.
Oh wow, that's scary.
It's scary stuff. Yeah, it's primarily the organized crime groups, but it's always important to note that most people think, North Korea isn't going to have a state-sponsored attack against my small business, but that's simply not the case. They'll find the path of least resistance and use it as a means of fundraising to launch other larger scale cyber attacks.
Wow, aside from the nation states, where are these organized criminal groups? Where are they mostly located? Are they everywhere?
They're typically based in countries that are third world, war-torn, and primarily regions that are very difficult for us to pursue any sort of action. So those are the places that these attacks are coming from.
Wow, so even if we know who they are and where they are, there's not much we can do about it.
It's very difficult, yeah. Some of the bigger fish have been arrested, and there have been consequences, but it's very difficult to do, and there are so many of these groups out there that it's impossible to track them down. And the way that they're doing these things, they tend to cover their tracks, so it's difficult to put faces and names to these attackers and these groups that are organized.
Wow. Well, How are they getting in? I mean, whether it's North Korea, organized crime, how are they getting into small, medium, and large businesses?
So as I said, the human element is the most common entry point, and what that means is phishing emails, which, if you're not familiar, are emails that mimic a legitimate one, maybe from somebody that you recognize, or a company or something that kind of inspires some urgency and emotion and invokes emotion in you to try to get you to click on a link or open up an attachment. Phishing emails are very common. Another common vector is compromised credentials. So a common practice that's not a good practice, but one that people tend to do, is reusing their passwords. So if I sign up for a grocery delivery service, for example, and I use my company email address and the same password that I use across my Facebook, my company, all of these things, if that delivery service gets breached and those credentials get that out there on the internet, somebody has not only my password to that service, but they have my password to my business email, my Facebook, my bank accounts.
Wow.
So that's one of the ways that they're getting in is the dark web, which is the underbelly of the internet, is a place that you can go and purchase credentials like that. You can find bundles of thousands of email addresses and passwords that have been previously breached, and you can buy them and then try to use them against internet-facing resources to try to get in.
Wow. Is that something where, if I was to buy those, I would just go to different sites and just try them, or is that something that I can automate where, I just load in 1,000 people's credentials and it goes out everywhere and looks, and I come back tomorrow morning and I'm like, here's 3 people that still didn't change their password, and now I'm in.
So that's the other thing that we're seeing is these attackers have better and better tools and forms of automation these days. So you're absolutely right. They've got great tools that automate these processes. One of the common things that we've seen is ransomware as a service. So it used to be that in order to execute a cyber attack like a ransomware, where you deploy malicious software and then demand a ransom to unlock systems, you would have to have a lot of knowledge and some sophistication in technology to be able to deploy something like that and execute. But with ransomware as a service, similar to buying stolen credentials online, you can go on and find platforms where you can purchase an attack, and all you have to do is feed them in some IP addresses or a domain name of a business that you want to target, and they will execute the attack on your behalf using tools that they have in place, and then you just share the profit with them. So it makes it very easy to automate attacks and doesn't require a lot of knowledge. You could teach just about anybody to launch one of these types of attacks.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. So you talked about the phishing, and you talked about the credentials, as ways to get in. Like, once they get in, what do they do?
Sure. So a third way that they're getting in is through misconfigured technology or outdated technology. So aside from the human element, there's technology out there that maybe hasn't been updated in a long time, and attackers are constantly looking for ways to reverse engineer this stuff and find other ways to get in and bypass security measures. So they'll use something like a phishing email as an entry point, or sometimes they can get in strictly through a misconfiguration or some old technology that's vulnerable. And then once they're in, ransomware is still one of the most common payloads and ultimately types of attacks that are carried out. So that's their end goal is financially motivated. But what they're doing is, it used to be a ransomware was just software that would run, it would lock up your systems, and you'd pay to have it restored. What they're doing now is they're doing a lot more studying and analysis of companies before they're fully executing the attack. So once they get in, they'll move around in your environment, see any way that they can escalate their privileges to gain access to more data, more accounts. They'll really take their time and see what they can do to inflict the maximum impact to an organization. And the ultimate goal is either something like a ransomware. Sometimes it's data theft. They're looking to see how much information they can exfiltrate out so that they could sell it on something like the dark web. And they're really just studying. And one of the things we've seen is They'll look for, does the company have cyber insurance? So that'll impact the likelihood of a payout. They'll look at revenue and really figure out when is the best time to execute a ransomware attack so it inflicts the most damage and really puts the organization in a spot where they're likely to pay.
Now, if you do decide that you're going to pay, like how do you know that if you pay a criminal, what's to stop the criminal from saying, well, thank you, and now I want more? Like, what do you do?
So there's no guarantee, certainly. I will say, however, there's no honor among thieves typically, but it really is advantageous for them to actually deliver when they're paid. Because like any other business, if it becomes common knowledge that a certain attack group is not releasing data or systems after being paid, people are going to stop paying the ransom. So they do have some incentive. However, it's not guaranteed. Some are more, I guess you could say, trustworthy than others. And oftentimes, in fact, in most cases, there's still some sort of level of data that isn't able to be recovered in these ransomware attacks after the ransom has been paid. So the FBI and the cybersecurity agency of the government release advisories giving advice not to pay.
Wow, so I mean, it sounds like this is truly not the hacker from the movies in the 80s and 90s sitting in the basement. This is 100% no different than any other business that's motivated by profit, whether it's a direct ransom or the sale of data. I mean, am I getting that right?
Yeah, they're very professional, very organized, and oftentimes they're more organized than the companies that they're targeting, which puts them at an advantage. They really do their research.
Wow. Well, how successful are these attacks? I mean, is this something where they go out after 100,000 businesses and they get into one, or is it more like they go after 100 businesses and they get into one?
So the attack scale is very large. They cast a wide net, and then once they get in or have a hit, they'll focus all of their attention on that victim. So they do target as many companies as they can. And these days, in the information age, it's very easy to do. There's a lot of open source intelligence sources out there. So you can go and do your preliminary research and kind of figure out who your targets are and who's really worth targeting. So there's actually a study that's been released that shows that auto dealers specifically have been targeted by attackers because they've identified that that's an industry that has perhaps undertrained employees and old legacy technology that may be out of date. So that's the attacker's view of auto dealerships, which makes it a challenge and a very important thing for us to consider when protecting our dealerships, is that they have this view and it's our responsibility to shift that and change that through some cultural changes.
Robbie, without naming any dealers by name, can you just share with us some horror stories that you've seen or heard about?
Sure. There was actually a large Midwest auto group that got hit, unfortunately, this summer. The timing was very interesting, probably more than coincidental. The FTC safeguards final deadline was June 9th. It was 4 days later that this dealership got hit with a ransomware attack.
Oh, wow.
We saw the notice posted online. They were given a certain period of time to pay the ransom. And what made this attack very interesting was not just this timing, which showed us, as I mentioned, that attackers are really studying their victims and figuring out how to deploy these attacks in a way that's most impactful. But the main goal of these attackers was not to take systems down and demand a ransom, but actually the threat to release data. And some of that data included 8,000 plus social security numbers. Wow. Of not only consumers, but of employees, family members of the auto group ownership, and just really a scary situation. Ultimately, according to the attackers and the information they posted on their site, the ransom was ultimately not paid. But it's important to note that one of the statistics that we see is that on average it takes about 16 days to restore from a ransomware attack. Whether you pay or not, that's 2 weeks worth of downtime and headache where you could be losing revenue.
Wow. I mean, not to mention you've got a lot full of cars that you're paying interest on, employees that aren't getting paid, and that's got to be a conundrum in itself. I mean, you've got all these people that work on commission that can't sell. How do you keep them? Do you pay them? I mean, there's probably all kinds of peripheral problems that pop up during that 16 days.
Certainly, not to mention damage to reputation. They actually did a poll, and 84% of respondents said that they would not buy a car from a dealership where their data was breached before.
Wow.
So that damage to reputation is a very hard thing to measure, but 84% is a staggering statistic. Additionally, when it comes to security concerns, the dealerships polled in a study by CDK said that only 37% of them were confident in their security. So these figures, when you factor them all together, it's really scary what the impact could be if you're hit by a breach.
Wow. I mean, that's terrifying that 84% wouldn't do business with you again. I mean, you think about all the things that a dealership does, over lifetimes to be involved in the community, to have a good reputation, to treat their customers well, to have retention, and to just be able to just boom, blow up 84% of your customer base in one instance. I mean, that's catastrophic.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know what the answers are there. I know that for many organizations, they end up having to do things like offering credit monitoring to those people that were victims of a breach. So if you factor in the cost for 8,000 people that were included in the breach, giving them credit monitoring services, marketing campaigns, PR campaigns to try to recover and improve your name and reputation post breach, it's very impactful.
Yeah, I mean, because you can't just pick up the dealership and move to a new community, and it's very difficult to sell beyond your borders. I mean, wow.
And I think one of the other results that we saw from the Midwest auto dealership that got hit, there's something that's been in the works with the FTC, and just last week it actually went into effect and has yet to be published and released, but they approved a new amendment to the FTC safeguards, which now includes breach reporting requirements. So previously, if you were breached, somebody would basically have to notify an authority. You weren't obligated to. So now auto dealerships are obligated to report any breach of 500 customer records or more within 30 days.
Oh, wow. That's a great segue into my next question. What can dealers do? What do they need to do? If I'm a dealer, I'm sitting across from you, and I say, Robbie, I don't want to get a ransom attack, and I don't want all my customers' data all over the dark web. What can I do to prevent that?
So some of the basics that we still preach and have been preaching for a long time now are multi-factor authentication, which is your second factor that authenticates you to an account. So you have your username or email address, your password, and then MFA is something you have, something you know, and something you are, and a combination thereof. So your password is something you know, something like your cell phone is something you have, and then something you are would be facial recognition, biometrics with a fingerprint, and you really should have 2 or more of those factors to get into any of your systems, especially those that hold sensitive data.
Now, if you were to do, if you did have the fingerprint or the face, the password, and the phone, if you had all 3 of those things, is there a way that they can trick you and get around that?
There are some ways, yeah. So something they can do is they can clone the SIM card in your phone, or they can even they can contact your cell phone provider and ask that your SIM card be transferred to another device. These are some of the things that they're able to do. Cell phone carriers are getting much better about protecting us from that, but it is something that can happen. So there are ways around it, but again, attackers are going to take the path of least resistance. So typically, if they get to a stopping point of, I have somebody's username and password, the likelihood that they're going to steal your device, clone your SIM card, something like that, it greatly reduces the likelihood that they're going to continue with their attack attempts, and they're going to move on to the next easy target.
This sounds like a kind of an expensive endeavor. You've got really talented, educated people that are going to live in a war-torn country or somewhere that's undesirable where they can't get prosecuted. And then you're going to go after thousands of businesses and then maybe even clone a SIM card. I mean, this is a lot of work. How much money are we talking about here? Like what's the finance? Like if a dealership gets ransomware, I mean, how much are they asking for?
So on average, dealerships have reported, this came from a CDK report, that on average they're paying $230,000 for a ransom.
Oh wow! So you can clone a lot of SIM cards and hire a lot of talented people.
Yeah, and but at the same time, it's those dealers that are getting hit probably aren't the ones that are getting the cloned SIM card or that level of depth. They're probably the ones that had the front door wide open.
Oh wow! So it's the outdated technology or phishing attacks is really where they're getting dealers.
Exactly, and the compromised credentials. Poor password hygiene is another very common thing that we see. This is something that's transformed over time. Everybody used to use that terrible password of password 123 because they had to have a password when passwords first started in technology. And then we started requiring more complexity. So you'd have password 123 with an exclamation. And so at OCD Tech, we have a offensive security division. So we act as an attacker and we try to hack into systems just as attackers would. So we have a computer that will actually crack passwords, and something like password 123 we can crack in less than 1 second.
Wow.
If you add the exclamation at the end, we can crack it in about 3 seconds. All the way up to, not to offend anyone listening, but coming from Boston, a common password is Red Sox 2018. Something like that, we can crack it in, again, about 90 seconds. So common words and common numbers attached to them are very easy to either guess or to crack if an attacker gets a hold of an encrypted version of a password, which is what computers use to scramble passwords when they're stored and transmitted so they can't be read. So the rule of thumb with passwords is something that's easy to remember but hard to guess. Something we recommend now is instead of a password, using a passphrase. So please don't use this example, but something that's more of a personal experience. Say I danced to an Elton John song in prom with Debbie. So my passphrase could be danced with Debbie to Elton John, prom 1995. Something long like that takes about 200 trillion years to crack.
Oh, wow. Wow. We actually had a training here where I thought you were going to go this direction, where they said use the phrase, but then maybe pick like the first letter of each of those words or the first verse of a song that you really like, and use the letters of the first letter of each word in that verse of the song. And I mean, I remember thinking, I don't know that I know any songs that well.
That's certainly another way to do it too. Yeah, because again, it's something that's easy to remember for you, but hard for an attacker to guess.
Yeah, I guess other than the Bengals fight song, but your computer would probably guess that. It would probably guess that about me.
Right.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit more about the prevention. What should dealers be doing? I mean, we've talked about all the ways they can get hurt, what getting hurt looks like, who's doing the hurting. What can we do to protect ourselves?
A lot of it is about training the workforce, making sure that cybersecurity is a top-down thing, that leadership is discussing it, factoring it in, including it in the budget, and really working with your IT. So one of the unique challenges of auto dealers is we find that the vast majority of auto dealers do not have a full internal IT department. They have either a contractor or a part-time person or a contracted third party. So in those cases, you really need to make sure you have that connective tissue between the business and the IT provider, and that you're having these conversations about security and that you're understanding the responses. One thing that we advise is to actually bring in a third party to conduct an assessment and check the work. Just as you do to have your financial statements audited, bringing in a third party, because your IT provider can tell you, yes, we're doing a great job and pat themselves on the back, or tell you we need to sell you more products to make you more secure. But to have a third party come in and objectively tell you, here's how secure you are, give you a measurement in language that you understand that can help you to prioritize your budget and make sure you're putting money in the right place to keep you protected.
Boy, I imagine with that password computer that you have, I mean, that has to just be like a rude awakening. Like you turn that thing on, and all of a sudden, if it takes a few seconds, I mean, could we be on the phone and I could tell, like, I'm a dealer, and you could say, I just got into these 4 systems. I mean, is it that quick and that easy?
It is in some cases, yeah. I have a kind of a worst of the worst slide during presentations that I give that are the sort of the blooper reel of what we've seen at auto dealers. And I will say, servicing auto dealers for 10 years, we've seen a lot of great improvement. But some of the early things we saw was we went from sidewalk to domain administrator in 5 minutes. So domain administrator is the keys to the kingdom. That gives you access to everything in the environment.
Oh my gosh.
In this specific example, we walked in from the street into an open bay door in the service department. The server room was located within the service department behind a door that was not locked. And we walk up to the computer, and sure enough, the username and password for the domain administrator account were on the screen of that computer. So again, less than 5 minutes, and we had the keys to the kingdom.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, AI and future technology is a part of just about every interview I do. I mean, like that, the one thing that I guess that doesn't change is that things are always changing. What's coming next? Like just so we can see over the horizon a little bit to know, what these hackers are going to, lob at us next. Like, what's the next threat? What do you see coming?
So we're already starting to use artificial intelligence in our simulated attacks that we conduct, and attackers are doing the same thing. So what attackers are doing is they can take information from social media, emails that they have access to, memos that are posted online, and use that to craft emails as an individual. So it makes the process much easier, because traditionally some of these spam emails and phishing attempts that were coming from these regions were very easy to spot. They had poor grammar, misspellings, and you could tell that it wasn't from the person that they claimed to be. But with artificial intelligence, they can run it through a website very quickly, and it'll correct any of that and make sure that it's in line with who the sender they're pretending to be is.
Wow. That's kind of, that's scary, because most people have a social media account, and on there you have pictures of all the things you like to do, pictures of your family, pictures, maybe work stuff. I mean, you can learn a lot about a person that, looking at their Facebook and their LinkedIn. I mean, if you could do both of those, you could learn just about everything about most people.
Absolutely. And some of the analysis that's being done too, once attackers get in, that's more and more automated. So once you get access to systems, there are thousands of files, and a hacker is not going to want to go through and open every single Excel file on every computer at the dealership. But they can use these automated tools and artificial intelligence to do the analysis for them and give them the meaningful information that tells them, hey, I found 8,000 social security numbers. Here's the location of that information. So they can really target where the information is, figure out what have I got to leverage against this company.
What is it? I mean, beyond paying a ransomware, I mean, if somebody comes into the dealership and gets 8,000 social security numbers, I mean, is there like a legal liability that the dealership would have, after the fact?
There certainly is, yeah. So recently, the FTC revised the safeguards rule. They enhanced it to be more prescriptive, and they also expanded its scope to include auto dealers. So about 2 years ago, this came into play. Auto dealers were given until December of last year to be compliant with about half of the measures, and then June of this year to comply with the other half. So at this point, the Federal Trade Commission has become involved. They're aware that auto dealers are collecting information in the lending process, similar to what a bank does. So they're looking to make sure that information is protected, and they have enforcement action that they can take in the scale of $50,000 per infraction, which if you have an attacker get in and you have a large volume of data and deficiencies that led to them getting in and information that they have access to now and have released to the public, those fines can really stack up.
So it's 50,000 per social security number, or 50,000 per like incursion into your system?
Per infraction. So that's somewhat open to interpretation. We haven't seen any fines imposed yet to specific auto dealers. The catalyst for this was one of the major dealer management systems being breached. But the results of that, the enforcement action was to monitor them for, I believe it was 20 years. So for a very extended period of time, they've got the Federal Trade Commission looking at all of their security controls, what they have in place, and checking up on them on a regular basis.
Wow. Wow. Well, Robbie, I'd like to ask you for some tips and tricks. I mean, I'm sure with working with as many dealerships as you do, we've been talking about doom and gloom and the end of the world. Let's talk about something positive. Can you share some tips and tricks that dealerships can be doing to be safer?
Yeah, as scary as it is, there are solutions. We recommend a top-down approach. It really starts with leadership, and it's about fostering a culture of security. So the ways to do that are to make sure that you're budgeting and resourcing security, and thinking of security not as a necessary evil, but actually as a value add. That 84% of consumers saying that they wouldn't do business with a company that they were a victim of a breach of, shows you that it's really a marketing tool to say we are more secure than our competitors. So that's an important thing to factor in. And another thing is that because of the unique situation of auto dealers having a lot of consultants or a third-party IT company that services them, it's important to have that liaison, the person in between, that makes sure that we understand these security concerns and that it's being communicated to leadership in a language that you can understand. So I always advise not to hesitate to ask the difficult questions. How secure are we? And demand the answers in a language that you understand and that can help you to make the business decisions to keep your assets protected.
That makes sense. I mean, no quarterback in their right mind would stand behind you and I if the Cleveland Browns defense was coming at them, and a dealership should do the same. They should make sure that whoever's guarding them, that they understand how they're being protected and that they are being protected.
Absolutely. And if you don't have the resources in-house that have the knowledge and expertise and that can translate this stuff, make sure you find them. It's always advisable anyway to have a third party come in and look at these things objectively and tell you how secure you are, rather than your own internal resources that may be more biased.
Well, Robbie, I'm terrified. I guess anybody who's not protected needs to make sure that they are protected. I mean, I think that's the gist of this interview. I really appreciate you coming. Is there anything more you'd like to share with our audience today?
Sure. I know it's scary stuff and it sounds overwhelming, but there is a solution. The solution is what we call defense in depth. So it's a layered approach. It's making sure that you have policies that say, here's how we approach security, here's what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, followed by practices, making sure that those policies are being carried out and that people are acting accordingly and technology is configured accordingly. And then finally, training, making sure that all employees are trained to understand the risks involved in working with technology and just staying vigilant and up to date on these things.
Thank you for coming, Robbie.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for taking the time to join us for this AutoSuccess Executive Spotlight. Today my guest has been Robbie Harriman. I'm your host, Brian Ankney. Hope to see you again soon. This episode is Over the Curb and Burning Gas.